Surely you guys have been on the internet before and you've seen a product or some treatment and it says, this is backed by research, right?
Mhm.
I mean, you see that literally all the time. So, when it says that, I mean, I personally, knowing what I know, think, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean that it's backed by research? Because a petri dish study is a lot different than a million patients in a real big clinical trial. So they're not all the same. So we're going to do a segment today. Not all medical research is created equal. And my goal here is to try to educate you guys and the audience in what the different types of studies are and what they mean. Because I'm very cynical when I see new treatments and new products. And even when people come by my office trying to get me to use stuff, I'm always like, what does the research show? And they're like, oh, we have all these, research papers that show this and that. And on first glance, when somebody says that, you might be like, okay, well, they got research papers here, but what do they mean? So I'm going to kind of go through these just to give you guys some optics of like what to look for when you're shopping out there, you see a product, you see a treatment, it says research backed. Okay, so there is actually a hierarchy of evidence. I actually brought a pic of it. Brendan, can you throw that second picture up there? And you don't have to memorize this, but this is basically the pyramid showing at the bottom what's kind of like the worst types of research going up to the top. I'm just going to recap them real quick. And a lot of these you won't see for actual products. Some of these are more medical research that wouldn't necessarily pertain to like a product or treatment, but just having like a good overview is a good idea. So we start out with like the low level stuff. So this would be considered really weak evidence. So that would be things like a case report. So a case report is basically if I have a patient that had some weird finding, I'm going to write about it and I'm going to submit it to a paper, and that's considered research. That's a case report. Very, very weak evidence because it's one patient, one doctor. There's no like control or anything like that. Opinion papers are very similar. That's me basically writing about a topic I know about. So I'm going to write about plastic surgery and I'm going to send it to a journal. Very, very low as far as like the level of evidence. In vitro studies. So this is when I say lab research. You've heard me say that, right, Sarah? So this product says it has research. What's lab research? Okay, so what lab research generally means, because me saying lab research is more of a generic kind of term. The proper term would be in vitro studies. So what in vitro study means is done in either like a test tube or a petri dish. So I'm going to put a couple of cells in a test tube, and then I'm going to put a chemical in there and see how that chemical affects these cells. That's what a lot of treatments these days or products actually back their evidence on, is actual in vitro, or what I like to call lab studies. And yes, it does kind of give you some idea of what a product or a treatment might do, but it's the most rudimentary, basic kind of indication of what that outcome might be. And so a lot of, doctors look at lab studies and they're like, well, okay, great, but what else do you got? The next one would be animal trials. A lot of products do use animal trials, and I'm sure you guys have heard of that. The issues that you have with animal trials are two things. One, treatments or products that have an effect on an animal absolutely do not necessarily correlate to humans.
Yeah, don't they usually test on animals first anyways, though?
It just depends. Like, there's a lot of pushback these days about animal research. And then, doctors and scientists will push back and say, well, like insulin was actually developed through animal research and that saved millions and millions of lives. Okay. But so there's a little bit of pushback on animal research today. I'm kind of like on the fence of it because I am kind of an animal person. But then again, if you can save, 100 million lives by doing some research on rats, I mean, I think most people would probably be okay with that.
Yeah.
But the issue is that's just kind of a starting point because, as I said, treatments and medications that work on animals don't necessarily have the same effect on humans. So if your whole product line is based on animal research, then it's not good. That's really, really weak evidence. And so that's one of the things that people should look for when they're talking about treatments, whether it be like skin products. And I'm relaying all this to the aesthetic world, but that's what our show is. Products, treatments that have animal lab research, not necessarily good as far as the level of quality of evidence. And further, a lot of times things that don't negatively affect animals will negatively affect humans.
Yeah.
And there was a really famous one. I want to say it was Vioxx, maybe. Don't hold me to that. But there was a drug that was animal tested that when they got into humans, it really had some bad effects.
Ew.
So those are all the low-level ones. So then the mid-levels will be probably not what you would see in the things that are aesthetic related. That would include things like cross-sectional studies. That's just observational research that gathers data from a single point in time to make associations. Case control studies, those are a little bit better. That's where you have basically two groups of people, one with a disease or condition and one without, and then you identify risk factors looking back in the past to see, okay, what did the people in the group that had this issue have differently than the people who didn't? These are more mid-levels. And then cohort studies, that's an observational study looking at progression over time. So the mid-levels, cross-sectional studies, case control studies, cohort studies. I always have to, like, in my mind, either think through those or look them up. Even as a doctor who's written research papers, I still get confused about those. So I imagine you guys are probably like, wait, what? For the most part, just remember those are just mid-level, not bad research. A lot of medical, aesthetic treatments are probably not going to have those anyway, but that's considered the moderate evidence. So then you move to the high evidence. These are the ones that I want to see when I'm looking at a new surgery, a new product, a treatment, a drug. I want to see randomized controls trials. Have you guys heard of these RCTs? You probably have, like with your background. Yeah. Do you know all these?
Yeah, kind of. I was wondering where peer-reviewed studies would be on that.
So they all should be
tower.
peer reviewed. So like to me, peer reviewed, it just means that, other people within your profession have looked at them. Like
Okay.
they should all be peer reviewed. Now, that just kind of goes without saying. These are more like the actual type of study, and then each individual study should be peer reviewed.
Yeah.
That means people look. And we do that. Like when we're doctors in training, we do what's called journal club, and we would peer review stuff, not officially but unofficially, where we read a study. And my favorite thing to do is look at a study and tell why it sucked, because I have this feeling that a lot of studies are just poorly put together. I mean, I firmly believe this from looking at studies my whole life. A lot of research is just not great. Like the methods are not great, the conclusions are not great, and so I love to like pick apart a study. So I like I'm an unofficial peer reviewer, but peer review like on an official platform would be like the people who are part of the journal.
Yeah, the journal of
The journal peer
blah,
review,
blah,
yeah,
blah.
peer review. So yes, peer review is very important because that way someone else is looking at it. Because this all goes to what I'm talking about is that if I just send a study to somebody who's not in medicine or not research or health backed, like they don't know if it's a good study.
Yeah.
So you get peer reviews to make that call. But randomized control study is the gold standard. Patients are randomized into two groups. One's placebo, one is treatment. Double blinded is best. So double blinded means that neither the patients nor the persons that's running the study knows if they're getting the placebo or the actual drug. So that's a randomized double blind study. That is the best. And then above that is meta-analysis and systemic reviews, where someone takes 10 or 20 RCTs or randomized controlled trials to get like a big picture over one topic.
Okay.
So those are the absolute best. Randomized controlled trials being the absolute best singular, and then meta-analysis or systemic reviews looking at multiple. And so, okay, so what does all this mean to you as the consumer? Are you guys looking to, to learn something? Well, if you're looking at a product or treatment and it says, okay, research backed, but you feel like maybe this is new and you don't necessarily believe it, or maybe the results are too good to be true, look into the type of research. If it says in vitro studies, animal studies, any type of thing like that, or case studies, it's garbage. It's almost like it doesn't mean anything at all. Like that's how low level it is.
It's really easy to make a paper say what you want it to say.
100%, Sarah. That's why peer review is so important, because you're exactly right. And you also should be aware if you find out that the person that did the study is the company that's making the product. Now that does happen. It doesn't always mean it's bad, because a lot of times companies will get an independent group to do the study because they want research. So like, look, we're going to pay for this, but we're not going to do it ourselves because that's bias. We're going to have someone else do it. But you need to at least be aware of those things. And then pay to publish journals are the other thing. A lot of the pandemic stuff that was really questionable came out of pay to publish journals where no one really reviews it, and you can just write a paper or study and it can be absolute hot garbage, and this journal will publish it. So it's not like a legitimate journal. It's a pay to publish journal.
Fancy.
Yeah, but it makes it look real. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I did this research. It's in this journal article. it's legit. And then you look at it and it's like total crap. So I do think this is important. This is probably the most boring topic we've ever done, but also probably one of the better things that you could learn from an educational standpoint to know if you're looking at something new, a treatment, a drug, and the drugs that come out, the official drugs like Pfizer drugs, they've all been through all of these, so they're very, very well tested. But it's the kind of off-label stuff, the aesthetic stuff that you don't know.
Yeah, like supplements too.
Oh, supplements are huge. Supplements are almost always, very low quality studies.
Yeah.
We've talked about that, and that's why I kind of, decided to do this. Is we always are dancing around the topic of like, is this good research or not? But this is like the segment where we kind of break it down. And yeah, I know it's boring. It's probably the most least exciting segment we've done, but it is good information. So
Yeah, agreed.
nice.